For 8 long years, Brad Pitt said nothing. Not a word, not a defense, not even a hint of how the collapse of his family had reshaped his life. While headlines argued for him or against him, he simply disappeared into silence, letting the world assume whatever it wanted. But in 2025, after years buried under legal battles, fractured relationships, and a $500 million war over Chateau Miraval,
private plane, and with 6 children caught in the middle of it all. For years, both of them mostly stayed silent about the details. Jolie occasionally hinted at what she went through. Pitt almost never addressed it directly. But 2026 has been different. Between court documents, a rare and surprisingly candid magazine interview, and the actions of his own adult children, more of the real picture has come into focus this year than in almost a decade. So let's actually go through what's true, what's confirmed, and what it tells us about where these two people are now. To understand where we are now, it helps to remember where this began. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie met on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in the mid-2000s, and their relationship quickly became one of the most scrutinized in modern entertainment history. They had 3 biological children and adopted 3 more, building a blended family of 6 kids: Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, and twins Knox and Vivian. They were humanitarians, producers, tabloid royalty, and for over a decade, they were held up as one of the few celebrity couples that seemed built to last. Then, in September 2016, Jolie filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. What followed was not a clean break. Allegations from an incident on a private flight surfaced. An FBI investigation was opened and ultimately closed without charges. And the custody arrangement for their children became the subject of a years-long, largely sealed legal battle. For a long time, the two barely spoke publicly about each other at all. Most fans assumed the divorce was finalized and life simply moved on. In reality, the custody dispute stretched on for years after the divorce was legally final in 2019. At one point, a tentative ruling reportedly granted Pitt joint legal custody of the children, adjusting an earlier arrangement to give him more time with them. Jolie's team pushed back, and the fight continued behind sealed court doors, out of public view, specifically to protect the children who were still minors at the time. That detail matters because it tells you something important. This was never a case of two people quietly co-parenting after a breakup. It was a prolonged, often adversarial process that played out largely away from cameras, but never fully went away. And as the children have grown into adults, several of them have made their own feelings known in ways that speak louder than any interview could. If you want to know how the Pitt-Jolie children feel about their father today, you don't need a tell-all interview. You just need to look at their names. One by one, several of the couple's now adult children have taken formal legal steps to drop Pitt from their names. Shiloh filed to do so the moment she turned 18 back in 2024. Zahara, now in her early 20s, publicly moved forward with the same process, even walking across the stage at her college graduation without her father's surname. Vivian has appeared in public credits, including a Broadway program, simply as Vivian Jolie, without the Pitt attached. And in the summer of 2026, their eldest son Maddox, now in his mid-20s, filed his own legal petition to change his name as well, citing personal reasons in the filing. 6 children. At least 4 of them have now taken visible steps to distance themselves from their father's last name, either through legal filings or public presentation. That is not a coincidence, and it's not something that happens in a family where the relationship with the father is uncomplicated. Whatever is or isn't being said publicly, the children's own choices have become one of the loudest signals of how deep the rift with their father may run. While the family drama played out through legal filings and surnames, an entirely separate battle has been unfolding over property. Specifically, the French wine estate the couple once shared, Chateau Miraval. Pitt and Jolie purchased the sprawling estate together years before their split, and it became something of a symbol of their marriage. They were even married there in 2014. But the winery turned into a legal battlefield when Pitt filed a lawsuit back in 2021 and 2022, alleging that Jolie sold her stake in the property to a third-party buyer without his knowledge or approval, allegedly breaking a verbal agreement that she'd consult him first. That lawsuit has dragged on for years, well into 2026, with both sides sparring over even the basic scheduling of a trial. Reports from earlier this year revealed Pitt pushing to speed up the timeline, frustrated by what his side described as a hostile new business partner disrupting the winery operations he'd spent years building. Jolie's response, according to court filings, was essentially that she didn't need his approval to sell her own interest, and she showed little urgency to accommodate his preferred trial date. It's a strange footnote to a decade-old divorce. Two people who are otherwise mostly disentangled, still locked in a courtroom fight over vineyards and business shares thousands of miles from Los Angeles. And this past summer, the estate found itself at the center of a very different kind of drama when wildfires broke out nearby in the south of France, close enough that firefighters had to use water from the property's own lake to help hold the flames back. For a moment, the legal dispute over the land took a back seat to the very real threat of losing it altogether. Now here's the part of the story that comes closest to Pitt actually opening up. In August 2026, Pitt sat down for an interview with Esquire that turned out to be unusually candid for a man who has spent years avoiding the subject of his divorce in public. He revealed that he is no longer sober, ending a stretch of sobriety that had lasted roughly 7 years, a stretch that began, by his own account, in the aftermath of his 2016 split from Jolie. In his words, he described going back and forth, testing his limits, realizing certain amounts weren't good for him, and settling into what he called a more restrained relationship with alcohol. He wasn't proud or dismissive about it. He described needing to be professional about it, treating moderation less like a triumph and more like an ongoing discipline. The timing of that admission was notable, because it came not long after he was photographed drinking at a very public, very star-studded wedding, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding at Madison Square Garden, putting his changed relationship with alcohol in the spotlight before he'd even addressed it directly. It's worth noting that this wasn't the first time Pitt has spoken with surprising vulnerability since the divorce. In earlier interviews, he's talked about experiencing suicidal thoughts in the years following the split, and about feeling like sobriety itself had become part of how he tried to rebuild his life afterward. Taken together, the picture that emerges isn't a man gloating or getting revenge in public. It's someone who has, in fragments over several years, admitted that the divorce genuinely broke something in him, and that rebuilding has been messy, non-linear, and still ongoing a decade later. Jolie, for her part, has also started speaking a little more openly, though on her own terms and in her own venues. In a Variety interview published in mid-2026, she said something that struck a lot of people, that her fighting spirit was finally coming back after feeling, in her words, taken down for a period of time. She credited her now largely grown children with helping her reconnect with a version of herself she felt she'd lost. She's also said in past interviews that she has remained single since the 2016 split, in large part because of her focus on raising her 6 children. And more recently, reports have suggested she's been trying to step back from the intensity of Los Angeles life altogether, seeking something quieter after years of legal battles playing out under a spotlight neither of them asked to return to. What's notable is how differently these two have processed the same fracture. Pitt's public reflections tend to circle around personal struggle, sobriety, mental health, feeling broken down. Jolie's tend to circle around resilience and recovery, being knocked down, and finding her way back up, largely through her relationship with their children. Two people, one shared history, and two very different stories about what it did to them. Here's the honest answer. Not in one dramatic sit-down interview, where he finally addressed Angelina Jolie by name and told his side of the divorce story. That moment, as of now, hasn't happened, and it's worth being skeptical of any video or headline that claims it has. What has actually happened is more gradual and, in a lot of ways, more revealing. Pitt has quietly admitted to relapsing on alcohol after years of sobriety that he directly ties to the fallout of this marriage. He's spoken in past interviews about mental health struggles in the years after the split. His lawsuit over Chateau Miraval keeps forcing new details about his relationship with Jolie into court records and headlines nearly a decade after they separated. And perhaps most tellingly, his own children have used their names, literally, to make a statement about where they stand, without him needing to say a word. If there's a version of Brad Pitt breaking his silence, it isn't a single soundbite. It's the accumulation of a decade's worth of small, reluctant admissions, still leaking out one court filing and one magazine interview at a time. Step back from the headlines for a second. And this story is about something bigger than two celebrities and a messy divorce. It's about how long the consequences of a fractured marriage can actually last, especially when children are involved, and especially when everything plays out under public scrutiny. 10 years after the split, these two are still fighting over a vineyard in France. Their adult children are still making choices, right now, about what last name they want to carry into their own lives. And both Pitt and Jolie are still, in their own separate ways, talking about what that period did to them. One through sobriety and mental health, the other through resilience and rebuilding. Divorce, especially a high-profile one, doesn't have a finish line the way a lot of us assume it does. It doesn't end with a signed piece of paper. Sometimes it just changes shape, from custody hearings, to surname changes, to lawsuits over property, to interviews where two people, years later, are still trying to explain to the world, and maybe to themselves, what actually happened. Brad Pitt hasn't given the world a dramatic confession video. But if you've been paying attention to the court filings, the magazine interviews, and most of all, to what his own kids have quietly done with their names, the real story has been unfolding in plain sight all along. It's just been a lot slower and a lot more human than any headline promising a single moment of finally breaking his silence would have you believe. If you found this breakdown helpful, let us know in the comments what part of this story surprised you most, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the headlines.